before I start this message, traditionally on Father's Day, I read dad jokes. But I thought your mom jokes might be inappropriate for Mother's Day. So I'm going to hold off on doing mom jokes till maybe some other time. But instead, what I did to honor our moms is I got 5 facts about moms that you may not know. And if you are a mom, you probably do realize these because you live these out. But here are 6 facts about moms. The first one is they're multitasking masters. Studies suggest mothers can handle 7 to 10 tasks simultaneously, outpacing most in cognitive flexibility. How many of you have seen that in real life? If I can do one task, it's a miracle. Amy does 7 to 10 and does them well. Superhuman senses. How many of you know they have superhuman senses? I've said this about Amy ever since she had our babies. Moms have a sixth sense called mom intuition. Research shows heightened emotional intelligence in mothers due to bonding hormones like oxytocin. I've always laughed because Amy wakes up like 30 seconds before the baby wakes up. And it's just like, I'm like, how do you're like a Jedi or something. You can like sense these things are coming. Superhuman sixth sense. Sleep sacrifice. I think that's a go. I mean, everyone knows this one. On average, new moms lose about 700 hours of sleep in the first year of a baby's life. That's a lot of sleep. Equivalent to a nearly 1 month of no sleep. How many new moms get that one? 700 hours in that first year. Mom brain is real. Research shows mom brains rewired to prioritize empathy and baby bonding, temporarily affecting memory, but boosting emotional smarts. Mom brain, anybody? All right, heart sync. Studies show that when moms cuddle babies, their heartbeats can synchronize. This happens due to close physical contact, calming both mom and baby through shared rhythm. And the last one here, and Carissa hit on this too, the church is full of moms. The church is full of moms. In Jesus, being a mom isn't tied to only giving birth. In the church, moms are found throughout the community. And I have a great mom, personally. I was blessed with a mom, and I am, by all means, a mama's boy. But I also am a product of a community of moms. When I think about my childhood and I look back on growing up in the church, my mind goes to a variety of different women who raised me. And I don't think I would know Jesus the way I do today without all of them. I can remember sitting while mom and dad, I was a pastor's kid, so mom and dad were always working a lot on Sundays. And so I was always sitting with people. And I can remember one particular woman, her name was Elsie. She was basically a grandma to me because I wasn't around my grandmas a lot. But every Sunday, I remember sitting next to her. She'd always give me a stick of juicy fruit. It was the best day ever. Someone to kind of just be with me on Sunday mornings. So when I think about someone who's just in the presence of a motherly figure, I think of people like Elsie. But I think that's a great picture of what the church should be is, no matter what your situation is, whether you're a biological mom, you're not a mom, a stepmom, whatever, the church is really full of moms. And I think this is a great lesson for us to learn. Jesus teaches us in Matthew 12, 48 through 50, he said, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" Pointing to his disciples, he says, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." And I think that's a really beautiful picture of what church can be and what should be is a family of people caring for one another just like a relationship, like a mother or a brother or a sister. So happy Mother's Day. That was my little Mother's Day prelude because the sermon I have really does not touch on much of this at all. But I wanted to at least honor you all on Mother's Day. Well, we are discussing forgiveness today. Discussing forgiveness. We've been discussing forgiveness for the last couple weeks. Jolene and Corbin have done a great job of setting everything up, and it's been really nice not having to prepare sermons for 2 weeks. It's been great to have a little bit of R&R there. But I want to begin today with a definition and explanation of forgiveness that I feel like captures well what it is. This says it's a personal act to release the one who personally sinned against you rather than collect on the moral debt to pay them back for their offense. While the pain of the offense may still reside in you, when you properly release it with God's help within community, it can be a catalyst to your transformation. And I don't think often we are aware of how much the wounds or the offenses or the stimuluses that we experience are pivotal in how we are transformed. I think we often understand the behavioral aspect, like, yes, because of this, I act a certain way, but there's also a catalyst of transformation that can occur in the form of forgiveness. And I want to talk a bit about that because forgiveness, especially if you've been walking with Jesus for some time, becomes something that you know you need to do. But what often happens is we get stuck. I think we get stuck. And we're okay with the I'm sorry and we accept the apology. What happens when you sit and brood on it for a long time? I think for a lot of us, we're okay with having the meeting and we'll say, yeah, I forgive you. But then a couple hours later, you're sitting in the car going, I can't believe they did that. You're still deeply wounded and affected by that. And it feels like you got a blockage in your heart. It's difficult to really, truly be free of that wound. And so I want to talk a little bit about what it's like when we get stuck in unforgiveness. How do we get unstuck? And how do we get rid of the spiritual blockage that's really stopping us from moving forward in our forgiveness? Because a real truth that I have found throughout my life is that what we don't transform, we will transmit. What we don't transform, we will transmit. And really today, what I want to do is set up a time where we are truly becoming more aware of those things that we are stuck in. What are those things that we're transmitting that we don't even realize we're transmitting due to unforgiveness that's happened to us in our life? And you may not even think about it this way. It could just be, in a way you're framing it in your mind of this is just who I am. This is just my personality, but you don't realize that it goes all the way back to a time where you may have said, I forgive you, but deep down in your heart, you're stuck in this wounded incapacity to move forward. And I want to walk us through that a little bit. How do we become aware of those things so that we can move forward and becoming unstuck into a transformative process rather than transmitting these things out within our community? Because as a pastor for about a decade now, I feel like this is a huge issue within believers, within followers of Jesus, that we don't necessarily recognize. I can't tell you how many times I've sat with somebody at a dinner table and they've explained to me a deep wound that they've experienced, yet they are unwilling or incapable of properly seeing the motivation to transform that wound into an act of love rather than just kind of going through hoping that it'll just go away. That, I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to cause problems. All these little things come to mind, and what they don't realize is they're stuck in a transmitted pattern where it's never just going to go away. And I want us to break that. As Leo Tolstoy and Martin Luther King will adopt later, I think it's called breaking the chain of evil, they call it. Breaking the chain of evil, these deep patterns of transmitted wounds that tend to frame us as personalities and our behaviors and actually deeply affect our communities and stop us from being healing communities rather than transformative communities that really should be a place where you can come in and be aware and work these things out in process. I think the chain gets broken when we walk closely with Jesus into this transformation. When our pain becomes redirected toward loving action rather than just suppressed or buried and transmitted out in ways that we don't even recognize are happening. This journey of transformation rather than transmission begins when we become self-aware of those things that reside in us. What are those things that reside in us that make their home within us that we don't fully even recognize? Because we cannot heal what we do not know what is hurting us. We do not know. And often that's the case. We don't really understand why we do what we do and why we behave the way we do. So if you have your Bibles, we're going to be Matthew 18. I'm going to read 21 through 35, and it's one of Jesus' parables on forgiveness. So let's walk through this together as we think about this. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? Now 7 it was a common thing in first century rabbinic Judaism as a common teaching for that to be 7 times is normal. Anytime somebody wrongs you, Up to 7 times you can be forgiven. If not, then you can kind of cut them off, throw them away, get your retributive justice, whatever that might look like. Now that goes all the way back to Genesis with Cain and God saying, up to 7 times I will keep, no one will be hurting him due to his actions. But Jesus elevates this. He elevates this. He answers, I tell you not 7 times, but 77 times, or what you may have learned growing up, 70 times 7 times. And what Jesus is doing here is he is elevating this. And I've had people come and tell me, they're like, I've done the math, and it's like 491 times. So if somebody wrongs me that many times, I'm free to just cut them off, right? And I can live in this place of unforgiveness. And they were dead serious about this. But what Jesus is really saying here is it's this number of completion. It's a number of infinity, unlimited forgiveness. So whereas Peter's kind of like, so 7 times they wrong me, I'm good, just like lashing out, right? Tick for tack, I'm good. And Jesus is like, absolutely not. 7 times 7, unlimited forgiveness. And then as a good teacher, like Jesus is, he gives us a story or a parable kind of anticipating our response to this. He says, therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Now, in Greek, that's 10,000 talents. It's an astronomical number. This is the kind of number that great nations in the ancient world would pay each other after great wars. And this would be like the war debt of the war in Iraq or Afghanistan. You're talking trillions of dollars today. Lots of money. Ridiculous, like almost a comedic amount of money. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that they had be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay everything back. And this is a joke. People would have laughed at this because it would be like taking like myself and be like, hey, the government coming to me and say, you got to pay for an entire war. Do you have trillions of dollars? Because we need it. You got to pay it back or you go to jail. Like that's exactly what it would have been like in Jesus' day. People would have kind of smirked and laughed that this servant would be like, don't worry, I got you. I'll pay you back. They were like, that's a debt that will never be paid. The servant's master took pity on him and canceled the debt and let him go. But when the servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. Now this would be a very payable debt. It's a debt, but it's a payable debt. Maybe 4 or 5 months' wages to pay this debt. So it's definitely in proportion to somebody who could pay this back. Instead, though, he grabbed him and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me and I will pay you back. Same exact words. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. You wicked servant, he said. I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. Passages like this should really make us pause and really make us think about the seriousness of unforgiveness, the seriousness of doing the difficult thing of forgiving. I think that last part, forgive your brother and sister from your heart. That forgiveness is a instinctual, natural thing for those who are followers of Jesus. It comes deep down in the very core of who we are. Not the superficial, yeah, I said I'm sorry, kind of like my kids do when they fight, right? My kids get in a fight, they pull hair, whatnot, you kind of bring them together, say you're sorry, they're like, yeah, whatever. And then 5 minutes later, what are they doing? Pulling hair again, right? It's talking about a deep-rooted core of who you are, that the very essence of your being is proclaiming and giving out a forgiving posture. And this is where, again, I think the idea of awareness, self-awareness is so important, that we have to be aware of those things that we're still hurting us and wounded us that we have not yet worked through to forgiveness. In fact, a lot of times it's been so long, most of our lives we've been carrying this wound that we don't even recognize it as unforgiveness. This is what I want to talk about a little bit, is how do we move through that? Almost the subconscious unforgiveness that we carry with us today. And I think the first start it's a good way to look at it is what to forgive. So there's 4 kind of general areas that we need to be aware of when it comes to what we need to forgive. And I want to start there. So the first one is forgiving others. Forgiving others, that's probably the one that comes to mind the quickest when you think about forgiveness. The person who wronged you or sinned against you, who hurt you, there is a posture of forgiveness that we need to exercise. That, again, that's Jolene and Corbin done a great job kind of walking through what stops us from doing that and then a lot of the perks and benefits that happen when we forgive others. But then what about the dynamics of forgiving ourselves? I think we can be quick to forgive others. Especially, I think it's simply like, yeah, I know Jesus told me I should do this, so I'm going to forgive you. But what happens when you make mistakes? What happens when you fall? Do you show the same grace to others as you show to when you collapse? I have found in my own life, forgiving myself is far harder to do than forgiving others because of the shame and guilt that accompanies the things I've done. It blows my mind that the Lord would ever want me to stand up here and talk to you guys about this. This is how deep this is in me. The hardship of forgiving yourself, because you are the harshest critic that lives in this world. How many of you guys know that? You are your harshest critic, and you have your own self-imposed shame that is crippling to you. And that could go back to some deep wounds of people that have said about you or to you that you still hold on to. Because how many of us have been told as we were kids that we weren't good enough, we were not smart enough, we were not good looking, whatever it might be, that then kind of roots itself into how we view ourselves, so that we have to almost make fun of ourselves. We have to tease ourselves to try to kind of make us feel better. All these things are kind of rooted into how do we walk through forgiving of our own issues and things we've done. Another one is forgiving life for being unfair. I mean, I think as kids, we start growing up in life that we just realize that life is unfair. I have 3 kids. My oldest kid is getting to a place where he can stay up a little bit later or watch maybe some different shows that my youngest kids can. And my younger boy will be like, "This is unfair, Dad." Well, sorry, son, life is unfair sometimes. We learn pretty quickly this idea that life just doesn't work out the way that we expect it to. And then there's a part of us that says, oh, it should be fair. And I agree, life should be fair, but the reality is it's not. Life is going to come at us and do things that we are just going to have to realize is unfair. And we become wounded by those. And we become angry by those things. We become cynical and bitter because life is unfair. And I don't think we necessarily realize the deformation that occurs in us when we have a life that looks around us and goes, it is unfair to me. And you can see how that might root into an adulthood of somebody who's going to grow bitter and angry at life itself. An area we need to be aware of and we need to work in. And the fourth one, I call it forgiving of our circumstances. All of us get to a point when we are hurt or angry about the circumstances we find ourselves in. This is really a lot of times where people get mad at God. God, why does my neighbor have all the health and all these good things and doesn't even know you, and here I am loving you, following you, and I'm sick all the time? We don't realize that there's moments in our lives we're going to be angry at God. This is the why God. I don't like saying it's the forgiving God because that sounds like borderline blasphemy to me and millennial entitleism, so I'm not going to go there. But there is a sense of when you get angry and wounded by the circumstances you find yourself in, and you're kind of angry and mad at God. And you read some of the Psalms, and you're going to see an exact same posture of David. But we still have to walk through this. There's deep woundedness here. And I think we become very cynical towards God if we don't address these things that we need to look at. So we forgive others. Forgiving ourselves, forgiving life for being unfair, and then thinking about forgiving of our circumstances when we get mad at God. These categories have helped me at least become more aware and to give structure to the wounds that I have experienced. And so I can begin to think about what areas in my life do I need to forgive in those 4 categories. Is it others? Is it myself? Is it the circumstances I find myself in? Is it life itself for just being unfair? What are they? What are those things that are coming to the surface that make me angry or bitter? The servant in the parable, Matthew 18, he understood what it felt to receive forgiveness, but it didn't transform him into the act of motivating love to show that forgiveness to his own servants. He was completely self-unaware of what he had just received. It did nothing to transform him. In fact, he transmitted what was all that was dwelling in his heart to his other servant. That's why Jesus says you have to forgive from the heart. It cannot be a checklist, rudimentary, I did my good deed forgiveness. It must be a transformative act that changes you. Because if not, Jesus teaches us it leads to tragedy for himself and for the other people around him. And this is why it's so important. This is why it's so important that we learn to do this and walk this out. We must become self-aware of our pain. And here's a universal truth. None of us enter adulthood unwounded. If you think that, you're probably not self-aware. Okay, no matter, you could have had the best parents in the world. You're still going to become an adult and be like, I need therapy. It's just true. Some of us have major issues that we need to deal with. Some of us have more minor issues, but all of us get into adulthood and we are wounded. We have been said something. If you've ever been around people, this is going to happen, which all of us have. Again, you could be the best parent in the world and you're going to hurt your kids. It's inevitable. I know, I'm aware of this. It's terrible. I even see it in my 7-year-old son. I'm like, yep, messed some things up already. Right? And it's the important thing to do, though, is to help teach them and to demonstrate to them how to be a forgiving person. And parents, I think this is one of the best gifts you can give your kids. The more I think about this, the more I parent myself, this is one of the best gifts that you can give your kids is to demonstrate what it looks like to seek forgiveness and to be a forgiving person from the heart. Let them watch you wrestle with what it looks like to be forgiving. And it's really hard and really difficult. And it's not something that just happens really quickly. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes choosing to be sacrificial in order to be forgiving. Jesus demonstrated this. We talked about this over Easter. The first thing he says on the cross is what? Forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. Those very guards that are casting lots for his clothes, who are mocking him and scorning him, this first natural response from the heart of God is forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. He demonstrated the sacrificial difficulty of not seeking revenge. And if we're going to continuously just transmit our wounds through anger and bitterness and cynical or even violence, guess what our children are going to learn? The exact same patterns. As parents, we must learn to live deeply in the heart of forgiveness. That they see us ask forgiveness from them when we make mistakes, and we make a lot of them. But they must see and realize and see the fruits of what happens when we are released from our unforgiveness. To watch as we transform into people who actually look and walk like Jesus. We're all wounded. And if it's not dealt with, it doesn't just go away. I wish it did. I wish I could say, it has like a 5-year time lapse on it, and then it just falls off. That's not the case. As many times as it seems to just be easier to try to, I'm letting it go. Are you really letting it go? Are you just not wanting to talk about it anymore? There's a difference between releasing something from the heart and just saying, I don't want to cause trouble. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm just going to bury it, but it still resides in you. And guess what? It's coming out somewhere. There is a hole that it is leaking somewhere and transmitting to people around us. Ronald Royheiser wrote this, and I think it's a good way of thinking about it. He says, any pain or tension that we do not transform, we will transmit. In the face of jealousy, anger, bitterness, and hatred, we must be like water purifiers, holding the poison and toxins inside of us and giving back only the pure water. I think the water purifier is a good illustration that we are choosing to see what transforms and versus what transmits. Now, the same as a water purifier, someone has to go in and clean out all the muck. And this is where we need the Lord. This is where we need God to help us. This is where we need community, because you're not going to do this by yourself. You're not going to be able to talk about the things that are hurting you by yourself. There are definitely things you can sit down with the Lord, and he will bring things to the surface that are difficult that you have to address. But we choose to pour out into our world exactly what has hurt us. And I have a model. This is a simple one that I've developed that I thought helps, kind of brings into a way that we can think about this. So you have your offense, your wound, your stimulus, whatever it is there, that initial thing that's like, oh, that hurts. And you have your response. You know, this is your part where your prefrontal cortex is raging, your lymphatic system is off the wall, you're hurt, you're broken, you're weeping, you're angry, whatever that initial response is to that particular hurt or wound. And then it moves into a residing place. It kind of sits within you. This is where we may not even realize it's there. This is where we need to become more aware. It's like, what is truly residing in me? What hurts are residing in my body? And then it harbors, and a lot of times it harbors into transmission, where it can lead to things like being critical of others. One of the byproducts of a transmitted pain is that you're very critical of the people around you. Think about this in the sense of a marriage. Marriage, and I think spouses, the closer you get to somebody, often how more critical you can be with another individual, which can be really difficult. And that can lead to things like contempt or resentment. And once contentment and resentment get into relationships, it's extremely hard to rip them out. It's not impossible, but it's effectually really, really hard, because you're just constantly angry and bothered by these individuals. That moves into anger, bitterness, isolation. You know, we just remove ourselves completely. Cynical. This is probably one of the main ones I know. When I realize I'm cynical, I realize I have a wound. I make a lot of jokes. How many of you guys make jokes when you're uncomfortable? I make a lot of jokes about my cynicism. Sarcastic, a lot of sarcastic remarks. You may not realize that sometimes sarcasm is a form of woundedness that you're trying to cover up. And then avoidance. All of us have people in our lives that if we walked in the same aisle at Walmart, we'd be like, how do we get out of the situation, right? Avoidance is a big one. Noticing that there is something there that needs to be addressed. These things are warning lights within our system going, there's issues here, ding, ding, ding. We need to be aware of these things that are residing in us. But then there's this other option. There's this transformative option that takes the wound that we experience, that resides in us, and it moves us into a motivation of using it as motivation to love other people through it. The pain actually becomes our best weapon for loving people, which is a weird, ironic thing to say. The thing that was meant to hurt us actually becomes the means to which we become greater loving servants. That we act in love towards other people because we've experienced something like this. This is where I think Jesus does his greatest kung fu ninja work. Is he takes the greatest wounds, the greatest offenses, and he says, this isn't going to be something that defines you, or it's going to be those things that are transmitted through anger and bitterness and cynicism, all those things. I'm going to use it to motivate you. I'm going to use it to redefine you. I'm going to use it to show how you can be a greater loving person because of this. That is a miracle in of itself. So as we think about this, I want you to reflect on a couple questions that someone told me that I think are really good questions. When reflecting on what resides in your heart, think about this. Because a lot of times when we think about residing in us, it's difficult for us to, how do we even get to the core of this? And a good question is, can God use this? Can God use this? That a wound, that stimulus, that offense that's happened, can God work through that? And most of us will say, well, if I'm being honest, yes. Yes, he can. Do you really believe that, though? What about, is this pain now me? Is this pain now me? Are you now identified by this pain? Is this pain you embodied? Absolutely not. And I think, again, if you're being honest, you go, no, I don't want to be known by this thing that hurt me. I don't want to be known as that person who went through that terrible ordeal. That is not who I am. Or how about this question? Will I be broken forever? I think a lot of times we almost play the victim card so hard that we're like, yes, I am the broken one. And you just have to live in this place of broken woundedness because you've accepted it, that you're just going to be like this forever. But I think if we're really honest with each other, we really don't want to be. We don't want to be that person forever. We want to be transformed. And the last one, do I have a choice on how this runs my life? Do I have a choice in how this runs my life? And I think, again, if we're honest, we'll say, yeah, like I can choose to transmit this or transform this. I can use this as motivation to love others, or I can just let it fester and sit within me and transmit ways that I don't even recognize in my life yet. I think these questions help us to be more self-aware of our wounds, help us see that there is a huge benefit in the forgiving posture to break the evil cycle of transmitting our pain onwards to our children and the people around us within community. Self-awareness and forgiveness becomes particularly important in the older we get. There's been a lot of research done between the 20s and early 30s. Your main temptations are things like lust and success, ambition. But as we get older, we've realized that research shows that forgiveness becomes 10 times more difficult the older you get because you're more aware of all those things that hurt you. And so this is why we get people who sit on their front porches yelling at kids to get off their grass. Right? How many people do we know that are in the nearness of the end of life and they're angry and bitter about how life has transpired for them? This comes down into unforgiveness. Again, Ronald Rolheiser said this. He says, as we age, we can begin to trim down our spiritual vocabulary, and eventually we can get it down to just 3 words. Forgive, forgive, forgive. Forgiveness is the major task psychologically and spiritually for the second half of our lives. I think the goal here at the end of our lives, whenever that is, hopefully at least until you're 100, as you're preparing to meet the Lord, that you're not going into that preparation of this angry, cynical, bitter, older person, but you find yourself in a warm, gentle, loving, carefree position of a life that has been devoted to being a forgiving individual. Rather than bitter towards life transpired for you, you're grateful and gracious for the life that you've been given, regardless of the difficulties and the wounds you've experienced. That's the goal that I have. I had a grandfather, I called him Papa, the goofiest individual you will ever meet in your life. I'm named after him. Herb is my middle name. Surprise, okay? Please don't call me Herb. But I always think about him because he was funny, he was carefree, but he loved the Lord so incredibly deeply. That all the things that's happened to him, I mean, he had to declare bankruptcy, he lost the farm when he was young, they moved to California with just pennies in their pocket. There were so many things that he could have been angry and cynical about. Yet he chose to be forgiving. He chose to forgive through the circumstances and the pain of everything that he experienced. And he ended life happy and warm and joy-filled. On Mother's Day, I'll share this last story and then I'll wrap it up. Thinking of Mother's Day, there's a great story of transformative love. The woman behind kind of the inspiration of Mother's Day was a lady named Anna Marie Reeves Jarvis. And she was living during the mid-19th century. Pastor's kid, deeply loved the Lord. But she bore 13 children. Only 4 survived to adulthood. Man, can you imagine that? That is deep wound that I can't even imagine in my life, losing that many children and only having 4 survive to adulthood. This could have transmitted into things that, cynicism, bitterness, anger, thinking about circumstances, thinking about why God, all of those things very simply. Yet what it did is it transformed her and motivated her to begin a group called Mother Day Work Clubs. Where what they did is they organized another group of set of mothers around health and sanitation for public health, try to reduce diseases and raise money for medicine, saying her motivation, her transformative love for other people as, I don't want anybody else to experience this. So I'm going to be motivated in love to help bring awareness to these issues. Rather than being transmitted into pain and anger, it motivated her into transformative love for other people. After the Civil War, she lived in West Virginia, which if you know West Virginia, Virginia history, there was great anger and hatred towards these two states because one fought for the North, West Virginia, and one fought for the South in Virginia. And so her organization kind of adapted to the needs of their area. And so what they would do was they would host basically forgiveness events where they would bring people in from both sides. And there was anger, there was hatred, there was bitterness, all the things you could imagine if there's families sitting here who killed each other. And the organizations would work on bringing forgiveness. And the stories out of this place of people are weeping and broken for one another because of the experiences they mutually shared, which brought about transformative love and reconstruction in that area, rather than leading to more violence, more anger, and more division. This is the woman who inspired Mother's Day. It's almost like Mother's Day is about choosing transformative love over the transmitted pain that we do in our lives. So with that, I'll leave you with this. The pain we inflict and experience will never be wasted. The Lord teaches us that through forgiveness, those things can either be repeated or redeemed. Either repeated or redeemed. And so as you think about it this week, I want you to think about these questions as you try to dwell within this place of what resides in you. Ask yourself this question: what things are residing in your heart that need to be redeemed rather than repeated? Maybe sit down with the Lord, maybe sit down with close friends, a spouse, somebody who knows you really well that you can really be honest with. What things are residing in your heart that need to be redeemed rather than repeated? And walk them through, hey, I'm really oblivious to the things I'm sarcastic about. Or what are those things that you feel like I'm cynical about? That maybe we got come up in conversation. Let's talk about these things. Let's bring them up and let's address those things. The second one is, what areas in your life do you need to remind yourself to forgive again? That just like Jesus taught us to forgive unlimitedly, what areas do you need to bring back to forgiveness? What areas do you need to remind yourself that I need to release this? Not only just on the surface, but deep down in your heart, that this is not who I am. This is not who I want to become. I don't want to be deformed by this, but I want to be transformed by it. And the last one, what are you gaining from your unforgiveness? Really think about this one. Because again, we like holding on to our pain. We like being hold on to the things that have been done to us, kind of in this, in lack of a better phrase, victim mentality, this way of just kind of being like, I'm justified in feeling this way. In fact, I like feeling this way. But what are you gaining from it? Is it forming you into a person who's more like Jesus, or is it deforming you into somebody you don't want to be? So think about those this week as you wrestle with this topic of forgiveness. Take these things to people who you know and know you well, and have honest conversations about them.